Alright, so hey guys, welcome to another Warframe video, and today we're going to check out the final chamber that we can currently get for kit guns in Fortuna, the Gaze, and the kit gun that I made with it, which I decided to call the Noodle Spitter. So the Noodle Spitter is of course using the Gaze chamber, but it's also using the Gibber grip and the slap loader, which results in it being a one-handed secondary beam pistol that only does 16 damage per damage tick when it's gilded, 10 is radiation, and 6 is puncture, but it comes with very good supporting stats, so it has 25% crit and status chance with a standard 2x crit multiplier, a very high fire rate of 12 rounds per second with 31 rounds in the magazine and a 1.3 second reload, and it has quite a lot of range because the beam can hit enemies that are up to 40 meters away. And finally, when I gilded the Noodle Spitter, I added in a V. Now, I have two different setups for the Noodle Spitter, which are fairly similar, and they both require 3 extra forma where you add 3 Vs. And the mods I'm running are Hornet Strike for damage, Barrel Diffusion for multi-shot, Lethal Torrent for fire rate and multi-shot, Prime Pistol Gambit for crit chance, Prime Target Cracker for crit damage, and then I have Scorch for heat damage and Pistol Pestilence with Jolt for corrosive damage, though this is only versus the Grenier and high-level infested, and for the Corpus and low-level infested, I would switch Jolt with Scorch, which would give me gas and electricity. Now, while this setup is more than good enough to take care of the vast majority of the enemies the game can throw at you, there is one thing I don't like about it, and that's how diluted the status pool is. Because while the highest amount of damage you're going to be doing is either corrosive or gas, so you're mostly going to proc corrosive or gas, you're also going to proc quite a lot of radiation, heat, and puncture. And those are just straight up inferior, because radiation is mostly there just for the crowd control, though you could argue that it does give you a little bit of damage because the enemies will start fighting with each other. All puncture does is just reduce the enemy damage output, and yes, heat does give you a nice chunk of damage over time, as well as set the enemy on fire so it crowd controls them. But it's still inferior to corrosive procs, which will strip the enemy armor and make them much easier to kill, especially with some of the beefier Grenier units that have a ton of armor that scales ridiculously fast, or gas procs, which in the case of Corpus will carpet bomb them with toxin procs and murderize them. And that is why I have another setup that's only using 2 dual stat mods, so either Jolt and Pistol Pestilence for corrosive, or Scorch and Pistol Pestilence for gas, and I'm running Hydraulic Crosshairs instead, which will push your crit chance over 100%. Now, switching one of the dual stat mods for Hydraulic Crosshairs does 2 things here. Number 1, instead of having spikes of low damage when you don't crit, you now have spikes of higher damage when you orange crit. And number 2, even though this setup has 15% less status chance than the first one, it actually procs more corrosive or gas because you don't have heat or electricity getting in the way. So if this setup is better, why did I even bother to show you the first one at all? Well, because the first one is much better when it's paired up with a condition overload glyph because you get an extra status proc, whereas this one is much better on its own, so when you want to use a different melee weapon that doesn't work with the dual wielding system. Also, you might not like aiming down sights all the time, which is something you kind of have to do or should do if you're running Hydraulic Crosshairs, because if you're not aiming down sights, the mod just straight up doesn't work. And both setups also require the same forma setup, so you might as well try both. Now, while there's nothing wrong with this specific kit gun setup, if I were to build it again, I would actually give it more damage at the cost of some of the range and fire rate. Because as it is right now, this setup has pretty bad ammo economy, and you will need carrier to mutate ammo for you, whereas if you were to give it more damage and less fire rate, you should be fine with just fetch or vacuum. You're not gonna get as many status procs when you do that, but you should get a little bit more damage, so overall the effectiveness should be roughly about the same, just without the ammo issues. But please bear in mind, this has nothing to do with the kit gun chamber, it's just that I wanted a lot of fire rate and a very long beam, and it kinda just bit me in the ass in the end. So all in all, while the Gaze is not my favorite kit gun chamber, I think it's pretty damn good, and it's definitely worth building a kit gun with it. Though if you do want to build a kit gun, I would recommend you go with a hybrid build, because I don't think a pure crit or status build would be worth it. Because I feel like if you go pure crit with this one, the enemy defenses are going to scale way too fast, so your damage is gonna drop off really quickly, and the base damage of the chamber is so low that I feel like if you go pure status, you're not gonna have enough damage to capitalize on the status procs unless you combo it with a condition overload glaive. And that's pretty much all I have to say about the Gaze chamber and the Noodle Spitter, so I thank you very much for watching. As always guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. Bye bye!